All right, push one in the chat if you can hear me. All right, got a confirmation. Thank you for the confirmation. This is the Black Brain Trust, episode 540, Black Geopolitics. Please hit the like button as you come in. Share the video if possible. Hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust, including those posted on the community tab. If you want to engage in this discussion, there'll be a link in the chat for you to click on. When you click on the link, make sure you raise your hand so that one of us can acknowledge you and advance you to the panel. Just as the FYI, Zoom put out an update the other day, 5.0.3. Make sure you download the update on your device before joining the panel. I'll wait for people to get onto the panel and then we'll get started. All right, I don't see anybody joining, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the introduction on this. Tonight's Geopolitics is about the documentary by John Pilger, The Coming War on China. If you have not had an opportunity to see the documentary, you should go to the community tab and click on the link. There is a documentary in the that we posted the other day. Let me make sure I click on it. All right. All right, so the coming war on China, what does this mean for the overall aspect and why are we even talking about this? John Pilger, which is a documentary maker, back in 2015 put out a documentary called The Coming War on China. And he backed the documentary with quite a bit of facts, indisputable facts at that. And to be quite honest, he opened my eyes to quite a few things myself that I did not see. And so what's happening here is that China has been surrounded by military installations around the whole entire, their whole entire country of China, or at least the subcontinent for that matter. And this has been planned for a very long time. Go. Sorry about that. Smartwatch is going off. And so what's happening here is that as China begins to grow economically and militarily and politically on the world stage, they are also being confronted by a rising number of military installations and warships from the United States. And some would argue that even European countries have partaked in this, but Europeans are not a real stakeholder in this. They're a minor stakeholder. If anything, they don't want any of the smoke with China. And so the United States has had their eye on on China for quite some time. We know that they had engagements in Korea with the North Koreans, engagements with the Vietnamese, the Cambodians, Laos, many other Asian countries, wiping out their populations through warfare. Where I'm putting my cursor at right here is the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands have had quite a bit of an experience with dealing with Caucasian Americans in their occupation of the island since 1945, after they took it from the from the Japanese. And so what's happening here is the United States of America believes that it has a right to superimpose its will onto other countries, including its idea of democracy. The film starts with a brief history lesson as to how we even got to this point. The Marshall Islands has a significant role in this because most of your nuclear development has been done on this island, on these string of islands here, okay? It's a pretty grotesque film to watch. I don't really want to echo too much of what has been done to these people. It in today's terms, you would consider it to be human rights violations. Okay, major human rights violations. They made these people drink poison. They made these people live in poisoned areas from nuclear fallout after testing them, using them as guinea pigs. Generations of children born into toxic environments due to nuclear testing by the United States government. At the same time that they were doing this, you also had the Tuskegee airmen testing as well with the syphilis project. So we see that this is a growing problem with the United States of America's imperialism, where they go off to very different places of the planet and try to subjugate people as much as possible, even when it's not necessary to do it. They just do it. I would also say that a lot of this has to do with undiagnosed sociopathic, if not psychopathic, ideals. Okay. None of these people in these islands had done anything to anybody in the United States, not even the government itself. And yet these people had to suffer at the hands of imperialism. United States Air Force testing missiles, shooting them into the Marshall Islands, or at least in the vicinity of the Marshall Islands, as a way to test intercontinental ballistic missile testing to hit China. Okay. We have Nagon 11 on the panel.
Hey, what's up, Mike? What's going on, my brother?
Nothing much, bro. What's going on?
All right. Just fill me in very quickly as to where we're at this very second.
We're at the beginning talking about the Marshall Islands and the United States occupation of the Marshall Islands after 1945.
Oh, very good. Yeah, and what's the reason? What's the reason for that occupation that you believe, Mike?
The reason for the occupation is to cut off and to bring themselves closer to the deeper into the Pacific, as well as closer to China, keeping a close eye on Southeast Asia.
Very much so. Very much so. Would you consider this somewhat of a ring that we might be trying to put around China as well?
Yeah, I would consider it
A part of a ring.
yeah, I would consider it a big, if not a ring, it could be a dookie chain around China itself. Most of it, when you look at this map, I mean, this is just a rough map because of the video. I'm not going to play the video because I don't want the channel to get flagged. We have bases in Australia, bases in Philippines, bases in Indonesia, bases in Malaysia, bases in, or at least partnerships with the Singaporean military, bases outside of Vietnam, bases in Okinawa, bases in Pakistan, operations going on in Afghanistan, South Korea. I mean, when you look at a map, you see I mean, you can also take in Pearl Harbor as well. When you look at this map, if you're China, you really can't go anywhere. You can't pivot anywhere. Coincidentally enough, they call it the Asian pivot. The Obama administration countered it.
When we look at this and we look at all this ringing of China and thinking that we can literally control them physically, which as time goes on, we're going to find that certainly not to be the case. But would one think this is maybe a holdover from old Cold War thinking, or do they think that we're going to hold back the new rise of a Chinese kind of hegemony? But yet China is not one that is invading a lot of countries. They don't have a history of doing much invasion really at all. Mm-hmm. What do we feel we're doing here? Is this a sensible mode of let's say of defense from the United States, or could we be doing things quite a bit differently and a bit more productively with China at this stage?
I would say the productivity of engagement with China is coming from manufacturing.
Yeah.
So there's some level of productivity there. However, there has been this underlying fear, even under Vice President Richard Nixon in the 1950s, that something must be done about China. We have to keep our eye on China. The Chinese communist threat. Mao Zedong. All of these sort of fear factors. But what John Pilger did not touch on in the documentary is really, from an African-American perspective, from an ADOS perspective, is that this is a foreign policy based on racism.
It's a foreign policy based on racism for sure. But what I found interesting was how Nixon, because I'm going to cover that point, it's a big piece, how Nixon quietly went over to China and tried to open up relations and didn't let everyone know, that they did it. He and Nixon went on and did that and started talking to Mao Zedong and found in some respects he may not have been as big of a communist as they wanted to say. Maybe he his Politburo and so forth ran from a communist perspective, but he certainly was quite open to mm-hmm. capitalism being involved with his people and giving them an opportunity to grow. I believe the racist pieces come from the standpoint that China has grown, the concept of pure white supremacy and white hegemony that has permeated our thinking in so many ways, and the globe as well is under direct challenge, of which it actually sees its end. And would that be a great motivator for what they think they can do, that they can bomb this back into their favor and bomb them back into the Stone Age as well?
I think the window of opportunity for that has gone.
Yeah, so
they missed that window of opportunity. Mao Zedong, who reached out to Truman, reached out to Eisenhower, got no response. Reached out to the Kennedy administration, got no response. So we know that China made concerted efforts to reach out to the United States, but the United States had a big problem. Nobody in the White House could speak Mandarin.
Yeah, they had no one who had any language skills in which to deal with them. Which also goes to speak to say that they never had any plans, I guess, on really even communicating with them at that level. They didn't see a need for it, which I think was extraordinarily short-term thinking, but typical of the mayonnaise men of the time, for sure. Obviously times have changed, and we see things are different. And to push, do you think that this is because I think that we still are in a Cold War mindset with China, of which is totally out of whack now. I think this mode of thinking is archaic, and it's not, and it offers no solutions at all. Would you say this is a Cold War mode of thinking, and that we're just really driving ourselves more towards a serious physical war with them as well?
Absolutely. But this seems to predate the Cold War, though, right? The occupation that the United States had from the 1900s to the 1930s or the 1940s, through puppet regimes inside China, proves that they had no intentions on ever doing business with China on that level, from an equal footing. It was always to be under the subjugation of the American flag.
Yeah, well, certainly the British before. I mean, because when we start looking at the Boxer Rebellion or the Opium Wars, we literally saw England become, to force our way into to force their way in to actually get involved in their trade and force open their doors. We or let's say England, if you will, became a de facto narco state. They were like Colombia of the later 19th century, and early 20th century, that actually were moving in there and bringing in a lot of trying to bring narcotics, and we know the whole Opium Wars game that was played there, and the rebellions that came after, and the extraordinary riches that were made by people like Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grandfather, and how Lowell, Massachusetts, and Yale, and Harvard, and so in Columbia University, all of them were financed through the opium trade.
Yeah, the drug runners.
Yeah, and these guys were drug runners, but they took that money and built these institutions. But much of that was not just built on trade with China with respect to tea and everything else like that. It certainly was opium that played a major role in this, and that of course gets uncovered. That of course stays uncovered by history. The history wants to keep that quiet. So I would definitely agree that this has been a plan to keep the Chinese down, and Chinese will come in here, and help to build our railroads and everything else like that. Certainly during the middle to the later 19th century, moving into early 20th, of which then some of our more draconian immigration laws came about to keep them out as well. So they didn't want Chinese coming here, but then we wanted to go in there and take over their force them open for trade, and undermine their nation with drugs and so forth, to try to get in there. And then it was successful for a while, but then that was turned around, and when Mao and all that took over after the events that had happened throughout the First World War, and then after the Boxer Rebellion, and then going into the First World War, and then moving into the Second World War they had, and the Chinese Civil War, and then then Red China coming out as a communist nation, we were closed out, and we've been trying to literally find and fight our way back in there ever since. I don't think fighting a physical war will solve the issue that we're concerned about. Ringing them, there's no way that we're going to be able to deal with them. Especially now, did you not bring up a fact that China was designing many ships at this stage? Would you want to expound on that a little bit as far as warships and carriers that China is currently building at this stage?
China is launching one aircraft carrier every 3 years, if I remember correctly. It's either every 3 to 5 years, and a warship every month. They're launching a warship every month, whether it's a corvette, a larger frigate, or at least a destroyer. And they're producing, if I remember correctly, they have 2,200 aircraft, fighter jets, or at least military-based planes. At this point, they have close to anywhere between 25 to 90 nuclear weapons. So China has been ramping up. They've been working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the last 50 years to advance themselves. Now, it's interesting you bring up the opium trade, because, as you said before, Lowell, Massachusetts, Columbia University, Harvard University, Yale University, many more institutions were built off of the drug trade in the United States. Roosevelt's grandfather, one of the biggest cocaine cowboys, or opium cowboys, running around. I mean, literally on cowboy back.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
But some people want to say that, the United States was built off of, some mythological thing, like, this sort of capitalistic ideal. No, it was built off of a lot of blood, sweat, and someone else's tears, not their own. So when we look at this whole entire, documentary, it exposes a lot of the chinks in the armor that the United States has when it's in regards to deal with other countries. China is a country that has a civilization that predates the United States by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years. You could only go so far back in the United States before you realize who the real terrorists are. Before there was ISIS, before there was Boko Haram, before there was Al Qaeda, before there was Mujahideen, there was someone else. They happen to have pale skin and blue eyes, and so they project these sort of ideas onto Southeast Asian theater, more importantly, China.
Yes, who happens to be in the Southeast Asian theater, the biggest trading partner with all those countries that are there. Mm-hmm. And we are actually upset because they're trading with them, and we're saying that these are aggressive actions of which China is trying to take over other countries through aggressive trading. And we're saying you're getting upset at China trading with their partners, and these are aggressive moves that you feel we need to be checking at some point. Mm-hmm. I mean, these mayonnaise guys are out of their minds, and they're having a difficult time dealing with the changing of the guard. The changing of the guard, and that is a huge issue, and they're trying to hold back the dawn, and I don't believe that this is going to be able to happen. And I think we are here in the United States are going to have to take a much different look at how we're going to deal with this in the future. Shooting war happens and bombs start going off. Where does it stop? Where does it end? Well, it's not going to go nuke. How do you know? How can you really say? You can't. All right. When I started to look back at the Cuban Missile Crisis, just how closely we came to getting nuked, and if it wasn't for a rather not highly ranked but fairly lowly ranked political officer on a submarine that was getting ready to fire, who actually talked the captain down from releasing his nuclear missiles, which would have changed the nature of this game in ways that we may not even be able to see or understand. That almost happened. So we were about 30 seconds to 12 right there. When you look at the doomsday clock, that happened. That could easily happen. That could easily happen now, and it's not. I don't believe that this is something that will really, truly work in any one of our favor. So all this vicious saber rattling that I see going on right now, I don't see what the end. Whether we're going to achieve our objectives by doing this. I certainly don't see that as being a successful strategy at this stage. And we're going to have to look at some other things. And yes, the spectra of white supremacy as it has existed here in this hemisphere and around the world, at least for the last 150 years, that we see here is coming to an end. And in many respects, it's already come to an end. That's why they're saber rattling as they are. A shooting war, I don't see that being advantageous for them, but certainly not for us. And where will it end? You have any idea where this will end, Michael?
Where it will end is a bad economy.
To say the least. To say the least.
Yeah, when you take out China, even if America did survive, how would they be able to recover financially? They'll never be able to recover. They'll be bankrupt for generations on end, which opens up the military will be decimated themselves. I mean, the United States will probably lose half of its naval resources due to a conflict like this. China has the ability to take out pretty much Okinawa on its own. It doesn't need any real external help. It has enough capability, Martin's capability, to take that whole entire island itself. And keep in mind, from the documentary, the Japanese people of Okinawa are not happy with American bases being there.
They want the American bases out. Planes have been crashing and blowing up schools and killing
ospreys.
And all this ospreys, the wobbly goblins, as they call them, with their highly ridiculous functionality, that has not served very well, and many people being killed behind it. They're like, get these guys out of here, get them out of here, get them out of here. They're the ones who are suffering. So from what I'm seeing and how we're interacting and operating, we're not doing a very good job. We're doing a very poor job. The arrogance and the ignorance, and I think in some respects the stupidity of our leadership is going to poorly serve us in the future. It's going to poorly serve us. And that's something that John Pilger speaks about, and that's when he was talking about almost a Cold War kind of mindset that we're still using. It's antiquated. That's not actually in step with what's going on today. The game has changed, and and the saber rattling is not going to do anything. It's not going to. And China's already saying, listen, we're not out here looking to come out here and try to take over other countries. This is not what we've been about. In fact, the history of our country for over 2,000 years has been that we don't invade anyone. In fact, we've built a wall that you can literally see from space, and that wall was built not to take over other countries, but to keep others from coming into ours. Mm-hmm. That's their mindset. That's how they think. And that's something that we should think more about or look into more deeply as we deal with the Chinese and look to move forward in the future. This saber rattling in this war game is it's got to end. This is not going to have the outcome that we might think that we're going to have. Well, some of these neocons or neoliberals, as they want to call them, that are out here who are absolutely psychotic, psychopathic, sociopathic, who themselves need to be removed from power and even the public discourse, as far as I'm concerned.
I think what's important in this documentary is what happened on the Marshall Islands as well. the poisoning of these people.
Very much so.
Had I not heard about the Marshall Islands, I would never know it had knew it had existed. But you have melanated people on these islands, not African American by any stretch of the imagination, but they were definitely melanated. If you look at the documentary, a lot of darker skinned or darker complected people who I would have thought from a distance were probably Black people myself, forcing these people to drink, toxins and things like that as under the guise that it's good for them, just to see what a radiation fallout will do to human beings. When in reality, it was a military plan 4.1 that of neutrons to be tested on mice, and turns out they're really going to test it on human beings. And they had poisoned all these people. I mean, left them on an island that was not inhabitable by that should not have been inhabitable by humans, and watched these people decay over the next generation. None of them even made it for all intents and purposes. Most of them died before they were even, before they were even 50 years old. A lot of them are dead. So the United States government has a lot of responsibility as to the dissatisfaction of people on the global stage in response to their traversing and occupying of these islands in these countries. The things that they do when they get there, it's inhumane. But then when I compare it to slavery, you see that there's a lot of similarities in how they treated African slaves and how they treated a lot of these Asians and Pacific Islanders.
Very much so. Many of them, even in some of the wars that we had in the Philippines and so forth, you had white soldiers and others, calling those native niggers as well, and very much enjoyed killing them. Mm-hmm. The mess we've made and the cleanup that we should have is something that should be demanded on us. I mean, if you looked at our history, certainly after the Second World War, it has been a chronicle of savagery, mm-hmm. And absolutely psychotic, aggressive action. Mm-hmm. I hate, and we don't have to do a lot of this. And I know that there might be those who might want to sit down and say, man, this guy does not like America. No, I don't like some of the things that we do. And I don't like much of the leadership that we have. And I don't like the attitude that these people have in thinking that this is a sustainable game that's going to take us well into the future and keep us safe, happy, and healthy and well. No, I don't think so. I don't think psychopaths over long periods make good decisions for the long term. No, I don't think so. And psychotic activity and the war and this war economy that we're trying to keep pushing going is showing that it's not working. And there are those who wanted to push a very permanent war economy from the days of the Eisenhower administration up to today. So we are going to have to rethink a lot of this. This coming war with China that we're pushing right now is, in many respects, suicidal and absolutely deleterious to the world. Where I would hope smarter, cooler, and more intelligent heads will prevail over than some of what we see kind of operating now, which I can't understand with all these nukes and all this this war material that China is able to produce. Why would we want to get involved with this, thinking that a few detonations over a few major cities that are going to clean out 700-800 square miles of existence is somehow going to be acceptable? I just that could happen here. I'm saying I just don't see it. I don't see the reasoning. I don't see where we come out ahead of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just showing this image right here so that people can see, some horrific fallout of the nuclear bomb tests that went off between 1946 all the way up to about 1958, 1960. Horrific, man. And you see right here, Tony D. Brum, Foreign Minister, Republic of the Marshall Islands, is pleading for reparations from the United States at this time, to no avail. No reparations for the United States. The United States did disastrously things to displace, as a test case to see what it would do in a conflict to China. What would be the fallout if we were to nuke China? What would happen? I mean, yeah, you would have a lot of casualties, but what about the survivors? How long would they be able to survive for? So that's what they were doing the testing for, to see what would happen in the event that they did use nuclear weapons. And nuclear weapons is a sledgehammer of foreign policy. You cannot use nuclear weapons and think that the other guy who has them isn't going to launch his too. If they launch their weapons, you launch yours, you can forget about humanity at that point. There'll be a blanket over the whole entire world that would turn every day into winter until we basically starve out, and it'll be nothing left from radiation fallout.
Yeah, well, they were saying, that, you can see in any nuclear test, you can watch, you can see it on, TV or on the internet or whatever. You can see these clouds, and especially with these hydrogen bombs now, which are 1,000 times stronger than what we used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These clouds go up well into almost into the stratosphere. They go up 5, 6, 7 miles high. And they, of course, with all of this ash, it creates clouds. And these clouds that go up high in the air, they sit there and don't quickly dissipate. And a couple of these bombs that go off will just literally have these giant clouds that go way, way, way high up in the stratosphere, above the cloud layer that we generally see, during any clear day. It's quite a bit above that. And these black clouds then sit there, and they sit there very thick, and they don't dissipate quickly. So they'll blot out the sun, and you'll have this very thick smoke that will not dissipate quickly at all, that will hang around for months, maybe a year or so. Your temperatures will drop to below freezing. Mm-hmm. You will not be able to have any crops or anything else like that. So your food storages and stuff like that and growing food will go. So you will have not only extreme cold, but starvation, let alone some of the atomic ash and stuff that will come down that will be radioactive, that will poison, your water and everything else like that. And you're looking at, they talk about nuclear winter, but you're looking at a post-nuke world where very few people will even be able to survive. I know you have a few sociopaths and psychopaths who've developed underground housing and, and food and these kind of stores, and maybe they'll come up and say, we'll rebuild the world out of that. You have those who are certainly thinking like this, but to a large part of humanity, it'll be gone. And many of those people I don't think are going to do as fair as well as they might think that they will either. But this is generally what we are looking at. Generally what we're looking at in this type of deal. So who's looking to survive that besides extraordinarily psychopathic people? Now, I'm not saying that we don't have those people who will not be willing to do this, because I do believe that there's some here who will be willing to do it. But let's just hope that they, are not in power or in positions of power in which to do such. And that's kind of where we are with this. So this coming war with China, as we say, especially in this documentary that I've hoped a lot of people would have a chance to look at, goes into this explanation. And then there's an interview with John Pilger, actually, on another video, where about 11 minutes, where he goes and kind of expounds upon this and shows the madness behind this thinking as well. And I think that was one of the big motivations of why he did this documentary.
Yeah. And most of the people who who want to see a war with China, and says, oh, the Chinese, they're dirty, they're this, they're that. You don't want to look too far deep into American history before you realize who you can point the finger at. Now we can start with the Chinese Exclusion Act. Okay, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the first significant law restricting immigration into the United States. Many Americans on the West Coast attributed declining wages and economic ills to Chinese workers, although the Chinese composed of only 0.002%
of the population
of the nation's population. Congress passed the Exclusion Act to placate worker demands and assuage prevalent concerns about maintaining white racial purity.
Yes.
Where you at, though?
Where you at, though? But they don't like you, though. So, no. This is exactly where this has been. It's been like this for over 100 years. I had mentioned it earlier. The draconian, immigration laws that we put through, as Mike has just expounded upon, as to why we did that, and here we are. This is what we're worried about. The mayonnaise men are worried about their hegemony, of which is over. And they're looking at going to war potentially to do a reset on this. And I think it's a bit too late for that. And I think that's what Pilger was driving at quite a bit in this. And as we see China further develop the military and certain kind of moves on, the ringing of China that we have around of surrounding them, that's not going to be successful enough to contain them in a conflict anyway, in a 1v1 conflict anyhow. Like I said, we're going to have to rethink our whole move with China, Southeast Asia, and that whole area altogether. We'll have to rethink everything and come up with a different plan that doesn't include a highly aggressive conflict and bombs and guns and everything else like that. We're going to have to rethink this immensely. And they're not much different than we are. Their government, with respect to their Politburo, is the political aspect of it. We've spoken about this before, but their government is, professional politicians who run the Politburo. They are not run by the oligarchs or by the wealthy class. They are not run by them. In fact, the oligarchs and these people, well, they don't really have an oligarchy, but they do have very rich people there now, and those people are subject to getting torn out the frame at any moment, but by them. They don't like what these guys are doing. They can easily grab one of them and throw their ass in jail and keep them in there for ad infinitum, and they know that. So they're getting, so the Politburo runs that. But they do have a very capitalist structure to their country, and they're making a lot of millionaires, more per capita than we are. They have actually become more successful at capitalism than us, and that is one of the ironies of that whole game, of which we're seeing, and we have resentments about that as well. Here, our political structure is run by the oligarchs. It's run by the very wealthy class, and that's why we see a lot of what we see here. The one percenters, they run our political game. So at the end of the day, those are the only two differences really between the two countries, and they're running a more successful capitalistic game than what we're running here. And that's why they've grown. They've taken, over 40 million people out of poverty in the last 30 years.
600 million.
600 million?
Yeah, 600 million.
600 million. Excuse me. What number did I say? I say 30 million. Excuse me. I didn't mean
40 million.
600 million people, which is it's unheard of in the history of the human species that we know of so far. So we're going to have to seriously reconsider a lot of what we're of what some of these crazy mayonnaise people are considering. I think Obama and them had one view of looking at things, but still the military game played. I don't know what any new president will do. Will he'll take on the same ideas as what's going on currently? But I would hope if we do get a new leadership in there, that they'll take a different path or start to rethink a different path.
Yeah, the thing is that and I'm crediting the documentary to the social scientists from China, or the Chinese social scientists. China does not have a capitalist system; they have a market-based system. America has a capitalist-based system, or runs off of capitalism, because the capitalists have more power than the politician themselves. And so it rises above the political class and controls the over architecture of the makeup of the country itself. Whereas in China, that doesn't happen. Huawei doesn't control the government controls Huawei.
Yep.
In the United States, it's the opposite. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and so on and so forth control the government.
That is correct, and then that's the big difference. And like I said, the government, the Politburo, and so forth, they're in control, but yet they've been able to put together a system where they're able to give a system of rewards and work and so forth for the working class who can become wealthy, and they're doing in many respects a better job at that than we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very ironic, very ironic.
Mm-hmm.
So these are some of the issues. These are some of the things they're dealing with now. We have all these big issues about people talking about Africa and how China is going into Africa and becoming trading partners and developers and helping to develop their countries and develop their infrastructure and so forth. And there's a lot of back and talk with that, but that's a problem for America as well, because they're looking at China and the Africans kind of working together, kind of getting certain things moving. Now they have to come in and maybe see how can they undermine that, and that's another difficult prospect of how China's moved into this area, and Russia as well, and they're not coming in so much as like you see some of these other black folks who don't really have a good handle on what's really going on there, but saying they're coming in as colonists and new colonizers and so forth. No, that's not entirely accurate, and that's why there's a lot of concern here in the United States as to how China's moving, and some others are moving in Africa and helping it to develop, which is, I'm sorry, for another stronger bulwark against what's going on here in the West. And it's problematic. The West is starting to see, that it's maybe not high noon for it, but it's damn sure 11:45. And, that's a big part of the issue as well. Mike, what do you have to say to that?
I think you're bang on the money. I just want to read this excerpt here. Chinese immigration in America. In 1854 Supreme Court case, People versus Hall, ruled that the Chinese, like African Americans and Native Americans, were not allowed to testify in court, making it effectively impossible for Chinese immigrants to seek justice against the mounting violence. Okay. The black man has no rules that the white man is bound to respect. Well, so was the Chinese. So was the Native American. The yellow man had no rules that the white man was bound to respect. So we see that this sort of foreign policy is really just crafted off of really deep-seated racism. But again, like I pointed out before, that Chinese civilization predates that of Western civilization as a whole, even if you want to just narrow it down to the last 300, 400 years in this country, the British and then the British to the Americans. The problem is that most people who want to root for America in this whole entire this whole entire perspective doesn't realize what they're walking themselves into. You're walking yourself into a buzzsaw.
Very accurate. Very accurate. Very accurate. Very
It
accurate.
feels good. It feels good. To them, it feels good. You wave your flag around, but you don't realize without China. If China pulled the card today, pulled the pulled the economic Jenga block out of the stack, this whole country can come crashing down. We're seeing right now with COVID how fragile it is. That if the China cannot produce, you do not get anything, and if you can't buy anything, then your economy doesn't move.
If China decided just to pull its paper from our government or our T-bonds, if they decided to treasury bonds, treasury notes, which are debtor instruments, but if they decided to pull those and say we're out, this country doesn't catch a cold; it catches pneumocystis pneumonia. You're hacking up a half a lung, and you'll shudder, and you may roll over and fucking die. Not saying that you'll die immediately, but it'll be a slow, ugly, stinking doom. And that's kind of what they have on us. And we just went, Mike, didn't we just go back to the to the well with them just recently for another 800 million, I do believe.
800 billion.
800 billion?
Yeah, they got 800 billion.
800, it should be billion. Why am I screwing up these numbers here? 800 billion. Yes, 800 billion, almost $1 trillion. And here we are looking crazy talking some of this. We're looking kind of crazy. So they can pull the rug. They can pull the rug. They actually have the ability in many respects to pull the rug and create immense trouble here. Now, of course, China is a big trading partner with us. So the Orange Boy and all of them in there doing a lot of talking out the sides of their mouths. At the end of the day, understand that they have to play a certain game. I know that they want to hurt a lot what Obama did and all that to come in here, but they don't have that luxury to play that game. They don't have that luxury anymore. Yeah. So that's why I'm saying a lot of this saber rattling and stuff that we're doing right now to me seems crazy. We're definitely going to have we're going to have to even change the rhetoric. The rhetoric's going to have to change. The rhetoric's going to have to change as well. You talk too much about jumping in the guy's grill, he's going to be prepared for you to jump. And that sometimes that can work against you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, so the biggest fear that the United States has had, in their during the Cold War was socialism, this boogeyman, communism, socialism. They conflated the terms. They we have to do something about these people, because America's roots, for all intents and purposes, is rooted in Christianity. And so there's this idea that because they're not Christian, because they don't have our beliefs, they don't share our beliefs, they don't think like we do, they don't move like we do, they don't have our democracy, something must be wrong with these people. They need to be corrected. You tie this into an African-American piece, in slavery. This is the same ideas that they had back then too. And so beating people over the head with their religion and their beliefs, not realizing that the people that you think that you're trying to correct, their civilization predates yours by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years. The problem with westernized people, especially white Americans, is that they can't wrap it around their head that other people don't share your views. The Chinese are not going to get on one knee and bend to you. That's just not going to happen. Not at this point. They're just not going to do it. They don't have a reason to do it. And so therein lies the problem, not understanding China for who they are today and where they came from. What they did is impeccable. Very few countries can industrialize at that rate. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's right on the money. And I feel, as I said, I don't really have a whole lot else really to say. I was looking at Pilger's interview, and his sentiments were, and he did the documentary. He's gone over this with the coming war on China, and he spoke on what he thought. And at the very end, he was like, this strategy that we're looking at is really not going to work. And we're going to have to come up with something else. And I am totally in agreement with that. And how we move is going to be very interesting over the next few years. China is they are slated, moving at the rate that they are. They are going to be the number one economy in the world within a generation. The generation is about 20 years. How are we going to deal with that as far as engineers and scientists and so forth? They're far ahead of us in that. So it looks like for the people that they're producing and coming out now are going to be more technically savvy, more technically able. So that means that they're going to be the ones who are going to be controlling much of the technical innovations and some of the bigger moves that are going to be made in the future. That's they're doing a better job at that as well. So we have a lot to think about, and I don't know if war is going to solve these problems, these issues that we have internally in our country.
Later on in the documentary, you start to figure out what's going on here in terms of why there's such animosity towards China. And this social scientist right here actually points this out, and why white people have such a hard time dealing with non-white people. They just don't get it. Like I was saying before, they don't understand that things don't move in the way that they think they do. Okay. The social scientist actually breaks this down in the documentary at the 58-minute mark. If you listen to him closely, he actually understands and actually articulates this point. Hubris will be the downfall for the United States, that they think that because they have these big, massive warships and they can just pass their warships through the South China Sea and through the Taiwan Straits and so on and so forth. Not realizing that they're allowing you to go through there because they're getting a good perspective on what it would take to take your warship down. That's easy. That's easy. We'll let you pass it through there because now we know the navigation path, and now we can lay our mines right there. And when the war breaks out, we'll set those mines off, and your ships will come crashing down to the bottom of the ocean. And there's nothing you can do about that. And so, the U.S. plays this role as if gray beard, gray chested, animal, but then doesn't realize that the Chinese are just rubbing their hands, saying it's only a matter of time. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. If you really think about it, China is not really trying to. A lot of people try to connect that China is trying to occupy Africa, but in a way, their perspective on colonialism is different than what colonialism actually is. And so China doesn't have those ambitions. It just doesn't desire it. Even though it has the human capital to do it, it just doesn't desire it. It doesn't make any sense. For the United States, there's this desire to keep China in check and contained in this sort of one little enclave. It's the South China Sea, not the South America Sea, not the United States Sea or the Sea of the United States. It's the South China Sea for a reason. It pretty much is in Chinese territory at this point. You don't see Chinese warships passing through Puerto Rico on a regular basis. That doesn't happen. And so this projection of power and fear, comes out of ignorance and a bit of a sociopathic mindset that we have to do this. We have to do this, and if we don't do it, then something bad is going to happen. No, that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of things that the United States did that they, foreign policy and domestic wise, they did not have to do that.
That's right. That's a fact. We talk about it all the time. Didn't have to do it. And China does not have, if you look at their history, they do not have a history of running out and doing incredible invasions all over the world. You could talk about the Chinese Mongol, the empire, and they seized and they wrapped all of China up, and they controlled it. Okay, you had that era of when China was forming as a nation, and since China really has been formed as a nation or as a country, China has not been throughout its history a world power running around, far-flung enterprises taking over everyone. The real issue with the West was trying to really invade China to try to break into their economy, to break into their trading game, and force their doors open to trade. That's what that was all about. They had closed their doors to the West. They got this. They added as many miles as they could to the Great Wall of China. This was a wall designed to keep people, once again, I said earlier, to keep people out. This wasn't about expanding this around and trying to take everyone else over. No, they were trying to close in and deal with themselves. They weren't about going out and doing that. That's still the mindset that they have to this day. So a lot of what we're looking at doing is totally against what China has been about throughout history. History, I would say, that's been around far longer than ours. That has not been there. That has not been their history.
Yep. We have DE Raptor on the panel. Shalom.
DE.
Hey, shalom, everybody. How you doing, Mike?
All right.
Nagon.
What's going on,
I have a question, Nagon. Do you consider Khan to be Chinese?
No, I consider him to be a Mongol. I consider him to be exactly what he was. Yeah, I consider him to be a Mongol.
In a way, China has not been a country, because China has always been divided. And the last time, before the British came in, there were like 4 different Chinas.
I mean, you talk about anybody who reads Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and if you ever read that, which in so many respects a bit of the history, you have the Qin, the Chu, empire, and so forth. You start to look at the different areas, and it was all about this one great leader who could literally wrap all of China, all 4 seas up in a bag, literally, and right. and control. And they considered taking over all of what would be within China and its prefecture, laying around. They considered that the world. Everything right. outside of that wasn't. They considered that the world. So
until Mao came along,
the 13 chapters speak on that. But anyway, go ahead.
Until Mao came along, there was a China, there were Chinese, but there were 4 different countries almost. Well, even more than that, because nobody considered like going up towards Russia and Japan. Even some of those were taken off. But I said that to say something. Like a lot of people, the mindset of the leaders in China today are beginning really. Well, today, let's say go today. It's not to allow their people to go backwards into the position that they were before Mao took over, because China was a total mess when he overthrew the chosen one from the British and American, you know. And after he took over, he kind of built the Chinese into a single mindset where no matter what happened to us, we have to put country first above everything else.
Monolith.
Yep. So America, they saw that, but they thought they could control it. And when they found that they can't control it, like how they can control, say, Russia, you know, we can always push back at Russia. Even the Soviet Union, they can push back at the Soviet Union. But America always had this idea that, well, the Europeans, period, that anything that we want, anything that we want to do, we can do. And they're just digging this, now waking up to the fact that you have limitations. One of those limitations is a leader who will maneuver, will not fight you head on, but maneuver around you. And the second thing is history. And no great power will last forever.
Well, you know, you're talking about, you know, instead of the coming war in China, the coming end of the United States, and I think, you know, the United States has tried. One of the things we didn't try to do before, but we're doing now. We've been doing this over the last 50 years. Is really trying to create an American empire. And one of the things I think that kept us kind of moving forward before that was we didn't try to have empire, if you will, but we're doing that now, and we're not good at it. We're not good at it. It's expensive. It's far flung. It's like the old Rome, and Rome ultimately collapsed on its own weight. Too far flung empires took too much to keep them going. Too much expenditures for very long distances. And it as time went on, you couldn't control all these different regions. You couldn't control them all. You couldn't. And China seems to inherently understand this, maybe just throughout their very long history. But here we are in the United States after the Second World War, and really moved towards a movement towards empire. And that's been the biggest part of our problem. We haven't learned a lot throughout history. We're trying to contain people with a military industrial complex bigger than anything else that is expensive to run, very top heavy, and gives very little return as time goes on. Very little return. And the lessons are here, and here we are still pushing that. Racism and American exceptionalism and some of these very false, misleading types of ideas are just not looking to serve us well. I don't see how, this is not sustainable. It's unsustainable. And with other growing, you have a whole continent of Africa, and you have the Asian continent, if you will, that are very young people that are there, very young people and growing very quickly. You think you're going to stop that through war, and that's your game? That's your game plan? I think it's ridiculous. I think it's insane, how our leadership is going to come about to adjust this, I don't know. But the path that we're on right now is not going to bring the results that we want. We're not seeing a lot of good coming out of this right now. China has very little debt, very little debt. Russia has very little debt. We are yes, we're hobbled with immense debt. How are we going to clear that? Through war?
The problem is, that I'm seeing is that it supposes that other countries are inferior to, or other people are inferior to the United States, and in order to have a foreign policy, you got to use this massive sledgehammer on everyone, and you don't have to do that. The Chinese have proven that in Africa, you don't need to use a sledgehammer.
Sure don't.
The problem with white people is that it's being run by these undiagnosed psychopathic people who don't have any regard for non-whites. And so what happened in the Marshall Islands, what happened in slavery, what happened with the Opium Wars, that's where the policy is so destructive that you eventually run into an area where you have very little return on investment. It's not really getting you anywhere for the long term. Nothing good is coming out of trying to go to war with China. At least according to this documentary, nothing good is going to come from this. You might take out 1/4 or 1/5 of their people, but through a military strike, even if you just wanted to hit their civilian population, what are you going to do when there's a full response by China? China has all means and capabilities to respond. We know that in 2015, the United States military, the Navy practiced a naval blockade on China. What a disaster that's going to be now if you try to do something like that now. Especially during the COVID crisis, your naval warships have a lot of sick people on them, sick sailors and whatnot. It's a disaster. There's nothing good that's going to come from this. Nothing good is going to come from it.
Don't see this. I don't see this thing advancing in any way positive. And the human resource that they would be able to throw at that situation, there, right in their area, is overwhelming. The human resource that they would be able to pull off of that, the human resource, and just us trying to come over there and move and use our bases and so forth. They might be able to lie, but they're vulnerable to get hit very hard as well. And the Chinese are on top of this. So to saber rattle and to irritate them is not the smartest. And the Chinese, many of their leaders, I believe that they have studied the art of war very well. They understand it. General Giap in Vietnam threw that at us like there was no tomorrow. He threw the art of war at us on a routine and regular basis, and we were beaten. They'll play this game there as well. China understands this. They don't understand it. Well, the Japanese understood the art of war from what I consider to be a very superficial basis. Because if they truly understood it, they would have never attacked Pearl Harbor.
Didn't Yamamoto warn against them attacking Pearl Harbor, and they still went ahead with it?
That he did. Didn't listen to it, and ultimately, Tojo and them, jumped in there and decided they were gonna roll, and then they paid dearly for that. But the Chinese do understand this, and they're gonna sit back. They're just gonna talk in very, very, very humble terms, but continue very strong preparations. So that means they're gonna be prepared. They're gonna be prepared for you.
They're going. I have a statement to respond to that. What's going on, brothers?
What's going on, baby?
Hey,
Just clocking out for the night. It's funny. We hear Sun Tzu's Art of War book. We hear it invoked in these spaces quite often, actually. But you know what? I don't think that there's ever an actual true understanding of the application of such. But you need no better example than what you're talking about.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If many invoke it, but many don't have a very
absolutely
deep understanding of what it really means, or they have a superficial understanding of it, a superficial understanding. They don't have a very deep understanding of what he was talking about, Sun Tzu and Wu Qi, and I mean their understanding is very superficial. Like I said, if the Japanese who talked about Sun Tzu all day, and we would be as majestic as mountains and all this kind of stuff, and and all this, talking all these nice flowery terms, but at the end of the day, if they truly did understand it, as I said, they would have never attacked Pearl Harbor. They've never done it.
A funny thing, Nagon, is that the funny thing is that the art of war is taught in U.S. war colleges. That's the funny thing. It's like they teach it, but they don't follow it themselves.
They don't understand it. They don't understand. General Jap and to show General Jap, General, commander of the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA. Ho Chi Minh's right hand man. In the battlefield. These were true art of war men. They read that all the time. They had the 13 chapters on them all day long, and they threw that book at us every day. Where we came and said, we won all the battles, we won all the wars, we won all the fights in Vietnam. Yeah, but you lost the war. It didn't mean anything. Still, these people don't understand it. They still don't understand it. We won all the fights. We won. We won Pork Chop Hill. We won all these places. You still lost the war.
But people don't understand that by the time we left Vietnam, there were hardly any trees growing.
We
couldn't beat the Vietnamese.
We denuded the place. What General Jap said, listen, we will lose 10 to your 1. For every one of you that get lost, we'll lose 10. We know this. But in the end, it'll be you who will tire. You will tire first. You will tire. If you understand what it is to have somebody, and I'll talk about the 9 varieties of the ground that Sun Tzu talked about. I won't go into the 9 varieties, but I'll go into one of the key ones he speaks about. It's called death ground. And a general will put his army on death ground. Why? He will put the sea to his back. He will put marshy defiles to his left, and he'll put unscalable hills to his right, and he'll leave the army in front of him. And he'll leave the enemy in front of him. What does that mean? It means now he has nowhere else to go. He's got to go through his enemy in order to survive. They don't have a choice. They will fight harder. They will be more motivated, and they will do what they have to do to destroy that enemy. And in those situations is where you literally snatch, victory from defeat. Generals will put their men in those positions in order to win a conflict. You have to understand what this means. And when you're going to ring yourself around, you're going to ring China. You're going to ring them with your enemy and ring them around and threaten them. You understand you're putting them on death ground, that you're leaving them no other choice but to have to break out and tear you out the frame. They don't understand that. You take a little kitten or a little dog and put them in a corner. That dog will all of a sudden look 5 feet bigger, 2 feet wider, and he'll come at you. A rat will do the same. This is nature. What are these people doing? They don't even understand. They don't even understand the game they're playing. This is what I'm talking about, understanding this game at a deeper level than what these guys are talking about and what these guys are thinking. This is Sun Tzu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're looking at a snapshot here of the military bases surrounding China. We see them in Guam. We see them in the Philippines. We see them in Marshall Islands. We also see them in Australia, New Zealand, just outside of Thailand. As a matter of fact, the United States has a military treaty with Thailand. It was even Okinawa. So what do you think China is going to do? Like Nagone is saying, if I need to pass my ships through there, if I need to receive oil, so for energy, all my energy consumption, you're stopping this, I think this is going to be a problem.
It makes no sense. I mean, these guys are these war college people. They're sitting in there, they're sitting in there jerking off because they're certainly not really explaining what's really have suffered these defeats. It's just doesn't make any sense to me what these guys are thinking, and I would just hope that as get the orange boy here and these neocons out, and or these neoliberal folks out of here, as they're calling them now, and start to act a little bit more sensibly and responsibly.
Mhm.
Be sensible. Understand, who you're dealing with. Understand the history of the people that you're dealing with. Understand, a bit more of their essence, where they're really coming from, what kind of people they really are. Get an understanding of that, you'll be able to deal with them better. These jokers, the mayonnaise boys, Orange One, and these guys talking the crap they're talking, clueless.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. I think this is from UY97. Okay, if some companies in my area charge an outrageous amounts for a training they want me to take, what are they? No, we're not going to answer that question right now. No. You can always email the Black Brain Trust.
Another question is re-up. Who is this guy re-up?
I don't know.
About the real question is the black community, how many are willing to die at 44 music? Well, it'll take too long to answer your question. And the truth is, you can never have freedom in that word, that one word there, in freedom in America. You put that word in, your question is null and void.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this: understanding the nature of the people that we're dealing with here. If you understand their nature and understand who and what they are, like I have a pretty good understanding of who these people are, you never will have the freedom that you want without seriously fighting and being prepared to go down at any point in time. What needs to be done to a large extent is, freedom that you're looking for is this next generation. We're gonna have to take we're gonna have to suffer a little bit more, sacrifice a bit more for the next generation, because you're gonna have to deal with a pretty serious fight. And that's you're not getting out of this, or you're not getting what you want without an immense battle, a very serious one. And we consistently fight, and then we get tired, we fall back, and then they get more recalcitrant in their moves and get more bold, and they keep coming back. Like the Norway rat. So they keep coming back like that, and you're gonna have to continue to consistently fight. So any level of freedom that anyone here is looking at, you're gonna have to do this through constant, vigilance and conflict. And a lot of it is going to be violent. Yeah, a lot of it's going to be violent. So I'm sorry to put it that way, but get your gun permits and go to the range and train in martial arts and lift weights and, strengthen your mind, through history and so forth, and study and all that, and be strong in all phases. This is what you're going to need. This son of a bitch is going to continue to come out. And the reason why he is, especially here, because he feels like he's been threatened all around the rest of the world. And you are in his country as he considers it, and you're the biggest threat to him as well. You're gonna have to fight for this. You better understand it, because he's not gonna stop.
Yeah. This will not end well for the United States. I think China will also suffer. The world will suffer. If you take out China, if you decide that you're going to take out China, you'll send every single country back into a recession that would be unthinkable. Okay, this is really an economic issue, not so much of a military issue. The military is just an instrument, but economically speaking, because they're tied into so many other, if they're tied into a globalized system, you're talking about hitting the reset button with the hopes that this corrects your you being the United States, your fears of a rising China, that you would have somebody on equal footing to the United States. That fear is going to drive you into something that you don't really want any smoke for. You will find yourself in a situation that is too far gone. All your warships and all your your fighter jets and whatnot won't mean anything. What value would it serve, especially if they've already been copied in China anyways, and they can just export them out? If China gets hit, I mean, United States military, United States Air Force, Space Command, and all that stuff can see what's going on in China. They know that the warships are being built. They know that the tanks are being produced. They know that the surface-to-air missiles and whatnot are being produced at a rapid rate. What value would it serve for you to go in there other than to just die, or to just crash the economy? Because that's the only thing that's really going to happen. You're going to lose soldiers, and the economy's going to crash, and you'll never, you may never recover from this. I don't think you can print your way out of this.
They'll be in the same position as Britain was after World War II, because after World War II, everything that Britain had its colonies producing everything.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? Just like how American businesses producing everything outside the country. Britain, the same thing. If you go back and look at Britain history, before World War II, they started producing everything. Everything used to come into Britain. All the monies used to flow into Britain from their colonies that produced this whatever. They took the raw material, sent it to England. England sent it back out. Right now, the U.S. is in that position. It's the ruler. It's the big power. And China is the manufacturer, which is similar to everything is manufactured in China. So if you got to throw a bomb at China, your guided missiles at China, all those parts that in the guidance system coming out of China, So when you destroy that, what are you going to build more missiles from? When you destroy the food, because a lot of our food is grown in China. Where are you going to get your food from? All the things that we depend on to live as Americans or as Europeans or British or whatever the case might be, manufactured in China. When you go into China to fight a war and destroy it, now you're in the position where you have to build factories. How long is it going to take you to build that factory? And after China strikes, now you got to put in your electric grid back in, all that, before you can start rebuilding those factories. And what's going to happen to your people? Your people are going to start dying off of all kinds of diseases. You can see it now. Even the friggin' mask that we need is made in China. The medication we need is made in India and China. People are dying here. So when you're depending on another country for everything that you need, or almost everything that you need, how are you going to attack that country and hope to survive?
Well, it's one of those classic tales of when the exploiter becomes the exploited.
Yep.
Right? Like, you basically said, wow, I can use this I could use these people, I could use this country as a great utility to enrich myself. All the meanwhile, within all of that, there's so much data acquisition. There's so much for this country to learn from those who look to actually exploit it for its manufacturing prowess. And the fact of the matter is this: in going to them to manufacture in gross mass, you gave up the goods. America, you gave up your intellectual property. Europe, you gave up your intellectual property. You all gave up your shit in exchange for cheaply produced goods. there was going to be a long-term effect to that. I mean, and there's not you can't tell me that there's not an analysis, analysts within our government ranks, within our advisory ranks, who couldn't foresee this. Okay, I'm pretty sure that there were studies, that there were papers written on the adverse effects of just completely offloading all of your goddamn manufacturing to a foreign country. I'm almost certain there were studies that were done that would show the adverse effects of this. But for the sake of shareholder confidence, we didn't give a fuck about that.
No, it was more greed. It was more
That's
greed.
what I mean. For sake of shareholder confidence, it does not matter. We need a profit now.
Yeah, it was greed, man. That's what it was about. And they started doing this in the 60s. I mean, we started to do, shipping out a lot of stuff to Japan back early after the Second World War. And it used to be a joke, made in Japan, when I was a kid coming up, made in Japan was funny. Made in China was funny. It ain't funny now. So, that's kind of where, that's that's where we are. The manufacturers, the corporations are making a lot of money.
Yeah, and part of me thinks that, the US is just that goddamn sadistic to where they would actually look at the studies and say, yeah, you know what? So let's do this. Let's reap every last bit of the profits as we possibly can. And then when the time comes for them to try to flex their muscles, let's give a go.
Well, you saw when real wages started to go down in this country, haven't really increased since 78, really. Since I mean, this is when we're really ramping up our outsourcing. So I mean, you have to look at all this. This is all this is related. So I mean, that's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. But it's profits, man. Like you were saying before, and here it is. It's profits. So we outsourced a lot of that. It's coming back on us. Like I said, this is not sustainable. A lot of stuff that we're doing is not sustainable because our what we've done and the rapacious, greedy, savage nature of the corporate Medusa that we have here has absolutely no allegiance ultimately, I think, even to this country.
No, not at all. Not at all.
But here we are, and now we're dealing with this issue, and we're trying to literally ring China with all these military bases and threaten them, being a giant trading partner, even in their own hemisphere.
It's almost as if the U.S. is being used as a proxy. It's almost as if there's a separate group that's using the U.S. as a proxy.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Please hit the like button. If you're not already done so, share the video if possible. Hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust and those posts on the community tab. Please check the community tab so that you can see the documentary that we're talking about, The Coming War in China by John Pilger.